Welcome, everybody. This is going to be about Russian dolls. My name is Debbie Troy. I'm a member of the United Federation of Doll Clubs. For this presentation, I will be concentrating on traditional Russian dolls, dolls made in Russia to represent Russian people. Dolls from the other countries of the former Soviet Union will not be included for the sake of time. Remember that old dolls marked made in Russia are pre-1922. Dolls that are marked made in the Soviet Union are made between 1922 and 1991, and newer dolls marked made in Russia are post-1991. Let's start our discussion about the Russian dolls with the earliest types of dolls found in Russia. The earliest dolls, among the earliest dolls, were rag dolls. According to ancient customs, as soon as a woman realized she was pregnant, she began making a rag doll. She made it without a needle, purely by hand, because metal was considered a dangerous element. And the doll could be made just of rags, or it could be stuffed with grain or hay or wool. Before the baby's birth, the rag doll was placed in the cradle, and when the baby was born, it became its first toy and protective amulet. A doll like this could be swaddled, dressed up, cradled, or, of course, over time it became dirty and frayed. But it was easy to disassemble these dolls, wash the rags, and put them back together. And the children gradually learned to do this themselves. These early dolls never had faces or even eyes painted on them, because according to scholar Galina Dane, a faceless doll was considered an inanimate object, inaccessible for evil spirits, so is protected from evil spirits. Russian dolls did begin to have faces only closer to the end of the 19th century under the influence of toys from Western cities. These are some modern examples of these traditional rag dolls, which I thought were quite lovely. Another variation of the rag dolls is the Motenka dolls. They're a type of traditional amulet dolls made in Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. And they were part of folk culture and magical beliefs because, first of all, they were tied and made without the use of needle or other sharp objects so that you would not poke or hurt fate. They had traditionally no facial features, but had some kind of cross design instead. They were made with specific intentions and wishes or tasks for them to grant of various sorts, such as guarding the family or maybe a prosperous marriage. And here's some examples of the Motenka dolls, and you can see the cross-shaped design on the faces rather than a face. Nowadays, these dolls are coming back into popularity as part of interest in Slavic cultures and of the past. Another type of very early doll is a wicker or straw doll. They're probably as early as the rag dolls, and as you probably know, in many cultures around the world, straw is an inexpensive and easily obtained material for doll making. The dolls in this image, as you can see here, are older. They're likely from the 1800s. They were made from straw, often right in the fields. They were designed to calm and entertain a baby or young child because the children had to be carried around with the rest of the family while they worked on the land, and there was no one to look after them at home. When these dolls were brought home, they could be more fun. They could be dressed in rags, as these examples are. Trimmed at the bottom, they could stand on the table or the floor and dance from vibration created by stamping feet or knocking on the table. Even bigger wicker dolls were often placed between window frames for the winter because the straw absorbed moisture. And this prevented the frames from swelling when the first frosts from the glass began to thaw. And then later, the children were allowed to play with them after they had performed their moisture absorbent function during the winter. It's just interesting to know that. Here's some examples of the traditional wicker dolls, but made by modern artists, made in the traditional way, again, without a needle. As with the older dolls, they're often dressed in clothing made from rags. And these are just some different nice examples of those. Another type of early Russian doll is a trihedral doll. Although these dolls, or some people would call them wooden carvings, are hard to find, they are unique to Russia. They were made, we know for sure, from the 17th century and on, They're carved from linden wood. They're made in the Vordoska village near Moscow and a larger center in the Sergiev Posad area, a town that belongs to the Moscow province. The wood carvings have been present in this area, just general wood carvings, for a long time. The early dolls have a triangular base and the later dolls have a square base. They were cut out with a knife, and then the details were worked with a chisel and small round chipper. The typical vertical grooves on the pedestals were made with those chippers. Different forms of cutting and then painting provided the details of the clothing. The founding of this craft is attributed to a legendary master named Tataiga, who carved the first doll by tradition from linden wood. These are two lovely examples from what is the Virtual Russian Museum. It's a museum you can find online to see Russian objects. And nice examples of these dolls, the trihedral dolls. Here you can see the vertical grooves on the base, which are characteristic of these figures. Almost all of them have those grooves. And here's just another example of one of these dolls or wooden figures. So now let's talk about early handmade cloth dolls, Russian dolls. Many of you know Anne Coleman. She gives a wonderful presentation on Russian dolls and includes several examples of these types of early handmade cloth dolls that are from her personal collection. This particular image is an object from the collection of Natalia de Shableski. She lived from 1841 to 1905, and she was a Russian noblewoman who felt compelled to preserve what she perceived to be a vanishing folk art and traditions of her native country. So she went around Russia collecting objects, including clothing and other objects and dolls, until she moved to France in 1902. She amassed a large collection, and it's a wonderful now opportunity for us to learn about older Russian history. This doll offers a true representation of a traditional outfit with all the details, characterizing the type of costume or outfit worn by the Russian ladies in the northern regions of Russia. And this image is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So we're going to move on now to the doll that the average person thinks of when they hear Russian doll, the Matryoshka, or the Russian nesting doll. The Matryoshka is said to have been presented at the 1900 World Exposition in Paris. And this is a nice postcard from that exhibition. Matryoshkas, or Russian nesting dolls, have been researched by Irina Sotnikova, and she produced an article called "Who Created the Matryoshka Doll," which is available in Russian on the internet. Luckily, there are some English translations. As for the first time this doll, type of doll appeared, she writes that sometimes the dolls are dated from 1893 to 1896. These dolls are stated in reports of the Moscow Province Council. In one such report released in 1911, Mr. Bartram, or Anendy Bartram, wrote that the Matryoshka dolls had appeared about 15 years before. In 1913, in his report to the Handicrafts Council, he wrote that it had appeared about 20 years before, so a little bit of discrepancy there. So these dates are very approximate, and that's why many authors, to avoid making a mistake, date the first Matryoshkas to the late 19th century. And there's another nice example. So this set of Matryoshka dolls is often described, you'll find it online, it's called the first Matryoshka. It certainly has the characteristics that were described in the very first set. The outermost mother figure, the biggest doll, is holding a rooster, and the alternating smaller figures represent sons and daughters and one son, and the smallest figure represents a baby. It is more likely that this particular set, this image, is just from one that's very similar to the original set. But I would like you to notice, as a doll lover, that the little girl here is holding a doll, which I think is nice. So the Matryoshka dolls are made from wood, from lime, balsa, alder, aspen, and birch trees, so different trees. Lime is probably the most common wood type. These woods share a softness, a lightweight, a fine-grained texture. The logs are aerated in the open for at least 2 years before they're worked. A master woodworker decides when they're seasoned enough. The tree trunks are cut into lengths appropriate for the heights of the dolls to be made and transported to the shop. And then they're turned on a lathe and sized to fit each other, and this takes a great amount of skill, intuition, and a master woodworker's experience. Interestingly, they do not routinely make measurements while they're making these dolls, so they do it from just knowledge and skill. The source of this information states that all the dolls from one set are made from one piece of wood, and that the smallest doll is made first. But I have seen YouTube examples of contemporary makers who make several dolls from the same size, from the same size piece of wood, many different pieces of wood, determined by the length of the log being used. So there's different ways to make it, but I think the important aspect is that the wood from all of the dolls in the set come from the same harvest, the same batch of drying wood, so that they have similar characteristics. So in the early history of the Matryoshka doll, woodworking itself was the most prized characteristic of the doll. That's what people thought was the most important aspect above the painting. But by the 1980s, that balance had shifted, and now the painting is considered to add more value than the wood turning. The raw materials for treating the work dolls before painting include oil to retain the moisture and a starch-based glue primer. The artist uses tempera paints, oil paints, gold leaf, and less often watercolors. Later dolls are sometimes decorated with wood burning techniques, and lacquer and sometimes wax are used to provide protective layers on the painted artwork. And you can even see gold leaf and silver leaf and things like that. There also are two schools of emphasis on the actual painting. One puts more emphasis on the doll's face, and the other features the costume and the details. Matryoshka artists are often also painters of religious icons, and that the icons that are revered in churches and private homes. And so the detail they can achieve in their chosen style can be quite amazing, as this beautiful example shows you. In general, you can assume that the more dolls there are in the set, the more valuable the set. The dolls on the left are shown dressed in sarafans. It's a type of ladies' dress called a sarafan. You see it's a smock-like dress. And the dolls on the right are dressed in ponevas and coats. Now, the sarafans are typical of northern Russian provinces, and the ponevas are typical of southern Russian provinces. But these are just two nice examples. These newer Matryoshkas incorporate wood burning techniques. Both of them do, both examples. And you can see that the set on the right is the religious icon style and also has the gold leaf. These are some examples of newer and older Matryoshkas. So this is a newer example. These are obviously older, more typical of traditional. And this group on the right is several dolls from my personal collection. I do have some of them. So this is another example from my collection. This set has 10 dolls, and you would think, oh, that makes it pretty valuable, which it kind of does. But I want you to notice I took a blown up picture of the largest doll and of the smallest doll. And you can see that the very smallest one, which is a teeny tiny little one, is very crudely painted. So the other value for these dolls, I would say, is how nicely the painting is done. And most of these dolls lately, more recently, have the description of what the doll represents, the artist name, and the date on the bottom of the largest doll. Many of these dolls depict scenes from famous stories, as is true on this set. So this is a set of 5. And you can see on the images that each image shows a different scene from a fairy tale. I don't know which fairy tale, but it does depict different important scenes from the story. And this again is the mark on the bottom of where these dolls come from. And this one was made in 2001. So some authors, there's a speculation about where these dolls came from, who first invented these dolls or whatever. Some authors speculate that the doll was influenced by a Japanese nesting doll depicting the Buddhist monk Fukuruma. This is an example here. These nesting dolls were made in the island of Honshu. And legend is that the first person who carved and painted one of these Japanese monk dolls was a Russian monk living on that island, interestingly enough. The story is that one of these Honshu nesting dolls was brought to Russia by the wife of a famous art patron, Sava Mamontov, in the 1800s. So others say that the dolls were influenced by Japanese kokeshi, which can be nesting dolls, and Chinese nesting boxes, or even Japanese Daruma dolls. However, I would like to point out that Russian toy makers had been making human figures from wood for many decades, including those trihedral dolls we talked about. So I think the verdict is still out as to the inspiration for these dolls. So let's talk about Russian bisque dolls. The antique or bisque Russian dolls were produced in the 1920s and the 1930s. Most are actually produced of terracotta, which is more porous than bisque and fired at a lower temperature. The skin tone is usually a little darker than traditional bisque dolls. Sometimes finer quality bisques are found created by the German manufacturers, sold to the Russian artels, and then dressed in Russian outfits. A Russian artel is an arts and craft cooperative. The heads were most likely produced using molds from Kamer and Reinhardt or Simon and Halbig. These dolls are usually, when complete, between 10 inches and 16 inches in height. They have sleep eyes, which are generally of poorer quality than the German bisque dolls. They are flat surfaced with a dull finish. They have smaller than usual black pupils. They're mostly blue eyes and some brown eyes. The open mouth, they're all open mouth with teeth. They have socket heads on composition and wood ball jointed bodies. Their wigs are often a coarse flax type material, and the hair that is usually blonde, reddish blonde, or red in color. So you can see on the photo of this doll, the face of the Russian bisque doll, these pale eyes that are where the pupils are too small gives them a wide-eyed staring appearance, and that's very typical of these dolls. So the majority of these are dressed in peasant type outfits, as this lovely pair of dolls here. They're from all regions all over Russia. The clothing is detailed with many layers, and many of these dolls wear the lapti, which is the woven shoes, traditional peasant woven shoes. You can see a picture, a close-up of one of these dolls here. The likely location for the manufacture of these dolls is a factory in Dunaeva, Khatkovo, which is a town known to have produced terracotta and porcelain objects. The town is located in the toy producing center of Russia, which is Sergiev Posad. It's northeast of Moscow. So the speculation is that's the most likely location where these dolls were made. The inset image shows the lapti. Like I said, that's from one of my dolls. I'll show you later a larger image. And I want to point out the image on the right. It's part of a larger photo, which we will see later. I believe the photo shows Russian bisque dolls, and the photo is dated from 1931, which is the right age for these dolls. So here are two of my Russian bisque dolls. I think the outfit on the girl doll is especially nice. There's a lot of detail. The face is nice, although very typical of these dolls. Here you see the staring eyes of the doll type picture on the boy. And here's that photo I was talking about. If you look closely at this photo, you will notice that the dolls appear to be the Russian bisque dolls. They're dressed in various outfits. The photo identifies the women as the doll makers and as Lithuanian. It's called Lithuanian Dolls and Their Makers. But I suspect that these ladies worked either making or dressing the dolls shown, but that the dolls are not necessarily Lithuanian, especially by their outfits. There is one doll, this second doll from the right here, who is dressed in an outfit appropriate for the Baltic region, which could be Lithuanian. And this lady here on the left is also dressed in an outfit correct for the Baltic region. But I suspect it's actually a photograph of the general Russian disc dolls, but it's a nice photo. And it gives us a good date of 1931. So we will now turn to Russian stockinette dolls. We're going to begin our discussion on these dolls with a little history about Russian artels, which I mentioned are art and craft cooperatives. The Russian Revolution, remember, occurred in 1922. And in the first years after the revolution, some of the privately owned small businesses were allowed to continue. But it wasn't long before these were turned into joint ownership cooperatives, which were at first owned by the former employees. These cooperatives only survived until the 1950s. The cooperatives which were involved in the arts and crafts were called artels. And artels existed in one form or another also before the revolution. And this is an example of the type of doll we're going to talk about now, the Russian stockinette doll. Russian artels were in existence, some of these were in existence in the 1920s and 1930s, and some names I came up with were one's called All Russian Union of Artists, another one was called Everything for the Child, another one was called Red Toys. It is believed by some sources that the stockinette Russian dolls were artel dolls, and it is true that the majority of Russian people, when they're shown one of these dolls, call them artel dolls. That's the name for these dolls in Russia. Although in the United States, we call them Russian stockinette dolls. Other workers, the major business decisions, what to make, where to sell, and so on, were made by the. There are other sources that say that these dolls were made in some sort of cottage industry, but that's really not very different from saying they were made by the artels. So again, they were made in the 1920s and 30s. The production of these dolls stopped completely at the beginning of World War II for the Russians in 1941. They were made exclusively for sale to foreigners, export, and international exhibitions. These dolls are not easily found in Russia today. In the early 1930s, Arthur and Ruby McKim and their two daughters were at an exhibition in Paris, and among the dolls from many countries they saw were the Russian stockinette dolls. The Kimport Company was one of the first and main companies to bring these dolls to the United States. These dolls are cloth bodies on a wire armature with painted and molded stockinette faces. They range in size from as small as 3 inches to up to 15 or 16 inches. Many of these dolls will have a white cloth tag on the inside of their clothing or on their undergarments, and the tag will say made in Russia or made in the Soviet Union, and in some cases also the district and name of the doll. The tags are usually in English, but there are some found in Russian. And over here we see two examples, one of the Kimport tag, where it says this doll was made in Russia, and of the type of cloth tag, which I call district tags because they usually show the district of the doll. I would strongly recommend Linda Holderbaum's book called The Other Russian Dolls for fantastic detail about these dolls, their construction and identification. So these are the stockinette dolls in my collection. The dolls on the left are the 14 to 15-inch adult style dolls, and the dolls on the right are some of the 6 to 10-inch or smaller dolls, usually representing children. So you have an idea of the types of dolls, and there's a lot of variety. This doll is from my collection, and it represents an Orakh woman, which is a small group of indigenous people in Far Eastern Russia. And you can see from the Asian details of her clothing that the Orakh people are Asian in origin. You can also see how nicely the details are as far as the boots show detail, the hair with the braids and the beads, the jewelry, and so on. And you get a little bit of a sense of the painted faces of these dolls. Many of the dolls have individual appearing faces, personalities. This doll is also from my collection. It represents a Smolensk district woman. She wears a classic sarafan. So again, that smock-like dress on top of a long-sleeved blouse. They all have, all of the traditional peasant Russian dolls have headpieces of some sort, scarves, hats. She has the Kimport tag. She had a paper tag that had a name Rosa on her, and she also has the district tag that says she's a Smolensk district woman. And again, you can see her pose, her face, nicely done. This doll represents a typical shepherd. They're called village boys. Some of the tags will actually say village instead of village. Spelling variations are common on these tags. This one also has the Kimport tag. Notice he has a brown coat on his shoulders. He's carrying a pipe. He has the typical Lapti shoes. And his name on this tag is Seraphin. There's a group of people called the Mordwa or Mordva people. They're an ancient Finnic group of people in Russia. This is an example of one of the dolls representing those peoples. This is my doll, and you can see her face is quite soiled, but still sweet. Her outfit is very interesting, her necklace, but from the photographs I've included of the typical outfits, you can see why these dolls are dressed this way. Often people think these dolls are male dolls because the skirt is so short, but actually they are representing women. This is a Ryazan district woman. She wears a poneva, so she's representing a southern district. It's covered by a flowered smock. It's open in the back. She has a beautiful smile. She also has some mild soil on her face. It's very common to see soiling on the faces of these dolls because they were cloth and they're very old. But you can see many, many different beautiful fabrics were used to make the outfit for this doll. So the smaller stockinette dolls were up to 12 inches, and they were produced also in the 1920s and 40s. These are often much easier to find. They're also made of stockinette or fine linen faces with painted features. The majority are made to represent the stereotypical Russian peasant of the time. Others represent ethnic groups or republics of Russia and the Soviet Union. The costume detail is generally simpler on the smaller dolls. Some of these were also imported and sold by Kimport and have the tags. Many also have the cloth tags sewn to the undergarments, and many have rounded hands with no finger details or distinction. They're called spoon hands. Some also have mitten hands, so they have a thumb distinction. And some have carved wooden legs and feet rather than the cloth feet. And here are some examples of these smaller dolls. The doll on the left has a Vovomezh on her tag, and she wears a Poneva outfit. And the doll on the right has no tags, but she is one of the Russian stockinette dolls. She has the unusual carved wooden legs, which you can see here, with shoes. And I believe she's meant to represent a gypsy. More examples. This is a typical peasant boy on the left. And on the right, a sweet peasant girl with her eyes closed. You can see them sometimes that way. Notice that both of these dolls have the spoon-type hands that I was describing. And they also both have tags that just say made in the Soviet Union. So I'm going to now talk about a little briefly touch on plastic character dolls from Russia. This is a doll called Cossack Chub. The Cossack Chub doll is very easy to find. There are also other dolls made from this story, his wife and other characters, but they're much more hard to find. They're very rare. This is my doll, You can see his tag that's tucked up under his sash in the back. It's in acrylic writing. The Cossack Chub and his wife story is actually a Ukrainian folklore story that spread to the whole area, very popular. That story was entitled Evenings on a Farm near Dikanka, and that's where this doll comes from. So you can, if you're interested, you can easily find these dolls. Are very inexpensive. I found this one in an antique shop. There are other dolls. During the era, the majority of the era of the Soviet Union, toy production was not a major emphasis for the government. They did make a lot of plastic dolls. A great variety were produced between the 1960s and 80s. Wide range of quality, variety, sizes. Very popular were these roly-poly babushka dolls. And also very popular were plastic cosmonaut dolls. They even made plastic nesting dolls rather than wooden. But I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about those, but just know that they're there. So let's touch on contemporary doll artists in Russia. This lovely modern Russian doll is in my collection. I know she's Russian because of her outfit. She's very tall. She's about 20 inches tall. She's kind of a boudoir, soft construction doll. I thought at first she was an Alexandra doll, and I'm going to talk about Alexandra dolls, but I'm less certain now. She has no tags or labels, but I still think she's quite lovely. Her face is embroidered. It's flat, but embroidered. So Alexandra Kukanova dolls, are probably the best well-known of the contemporary Russian doll artists. They're not hard to find. I would refer you to their company website for a lot of detail. You just Google Alexandra dolls and you will find it. Alexandra Kukanova began producing her dolls in 1989. Her first dolls were made completely of cloth. The same dolls were later made with ceramic faces. I have some examples. She introduced a group called the Russian Collection of Dolls in 1995. Up until 1995, all of her dolls were dressed in traditional Russian festival or peasant outfits. And now there's many variety. And this is a picture of her, an early picture of her, the artist. And this is the type of tag you find on these dolls. And just a picture of one of the early dolls. So here are some more examples of these Alexandra dolls. A full picture of the one I showed you, a close-up of a face, and another one, a more peasant outfit. The dolls are also flat and embroidered, but beautifully embroidered. The outfits pay a lot of attention to appropriate detail. This is my Alexandra doll, the one I have. She has that cloth label under her outer dress. She is meant to represent a newly married woman dressed in a 19th century festive outfit. The outfit is from the Vishnaya Zalgosh village, Tula province region, or in the Novoselevsky region. So you can look up, this outfit is so detailed and exact, you can look up exactly where she's from. Lovely doll, and she's about 20 inches also. So this is a more recent photo of Alexandra. And photos of some of her more recent dolls, the porcelain dolls. I don't have any personal ones to show you, but they're quite beautiful, as you can see. And another set of pictures of Alexandra dolls, the more recent ones, just to give you a sense of the variety of the types of dolls that she makes. And there are, of course, besides Alexandra, there are many other wonderful modern contemporary Russian doll artists. So I brought along some examples, or including some photos from examples. Alyona Abromova, Marina Bykova, beautiful. You can see again lots of emphasis on the outfits, which are quite lovely. Some more, two more examples of contemporary doll artists. This Anastasia Yanovskaya, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at pronouncing Russian, is a NIADA artist, as you can see here, and then you can understand why, quite beautiful. So that was a quick run through of contemporary Russian doll artists. Just one last slide. Some of you may know that I wrote a doll news article called Dolls in Space. Unfortunately, it was too late for me to include this image, but I like this image of the Russian cosmonaut Anna Kakina with her Barbie doll representing her. So another type of Russian doll. So thank you. Thank you for your kind attention. This was admittedly brief, and it's a brief introduction into Russian dolls. I hope it both sparked your interest and perhaps introduced you to some Russian dolls you never knew existed. I encourage you to investigate these dolls. There are many, many other wonderful examples out there. And just for your information, this is my source list where I got the information for my slides. Thank you very much and enjoy Adventures in Dolls.